The Ghosts of the Past. Marcus Carter sat in the back seat of his black Maybach, staring out at the Boston skyline as it blurred past in streaks of golden light. The city had been his battlefield, his kingdom, the stage where he had built his empire from the ground up. Millions flowed through his accounts daily. His name alone could seal billion-dollar deals. He was a king in a world that valued money above all else. And yet, tonight, he felt nothing. He exhaled slowly, loosening the cuffs of his tailored suit. His assistant, ever efficient, had just updated him on the details of his latest acquisition, a tech startup with a promising AI program. The numbers were impressive. The strategy was flawless. The victory was complete. But none of it mattered. His phone buzzed, vibrating against the leather seat. He glanced at the screen. A message from the board of directors, something about finalizing paperwork. His fingers hovered over the phone before he silenced it. They could wait. As the car pulled up to his penthouse, Marcus didn't immediately step out. He looked up at the towering building, his fortress, his sanctuary, the place he had worked for decades to afford. It had everything. The panoramic view of the city, the finest interior decor money could buy, a wine cellar filled with vintage selections he never drank. But it was empty, just like him. With a tired sigh, he pushed the door open and walked inside, greeted by nothing but silence. The sterile perfection of his home had once been a point of pride. Now it felt like a mausoleum. Marcus poured himself a glass of whiskey, letting the amber liquid swirl in the crystal glass. 7 years. That was how long it had been since Kate had left. 7 years since he had last seen her, since he had last held his twins, Ethan and Emma. 7 years since he had made the biggest mistake of his life. He had told himself it was for the best, that she had given up too easily, that she hadn't understood the sacrifices he was making for their future. But deep down, in the places he refused to acknowledge, he knew the truth. He had lost them. And maybe he had never really fought to keep them. That night, instead of dining alone in his penthouse, Marcus found himself at Le Jardin, one of the most exclusive restaurants in Boston. He had no real appetite, but he needed to get out of his own head. The hum of conversation, the clink of fine silverware, the murmur of deals being made. These were familiar sounds. They had comforted him once. Then he heard something that made his blood run cold. A laugh. Not just any laugh. Her laugh. His head snapped up, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. His gaze swept across the restaurant, searching, disbelieving. And then he saw her. Kate. His breath caught in his throat. She was seated at a table near the large windows, bathed in the soft glow of the chandeliers. The years had changed her, but not in the way he expected. She was still beautiful, still radiant. But more than that, she looked happy. His stomach twisted. And then he saw them. The twins, Ethan and Emma. Now older, their faces more defined, but still holding the echoes of the babies he had once held in his arms. But there was someone else. A boy. A little younger than the twins, sitting close to Kate, listening intently as she spoke. Something about the way he sat, the way his hands moved, the way his piercing blue eyes analyzed his surroundings. Marcus felt like the air had been stolen from his lungs, because those were his eyes. His son's eyes. A child he had never known existed. His grip on the whiskey glass tightened as a storm of emotions crashed into him. Shock. Betrayal. Confusion. Why had she kept this from him? Why had she never told him? How had he gone 7 years without knowing he had another child? The sound around him faded. The restaurant, the conversations, the clinking of glasses, it all blurred into the background. All he could see was Kate and the 3 children sitting with her. He had to know the truth. He had to know why. With slow, deliberate steps, he rose from his seat and made his way toward their table. Kate felt it before she saw him. A shift in the air. A presence she hadn't felt in years. And then, when she looked up, her breath hitched. Marcus. For a second, she forgot to breathe. His hair was slightly shorter than she remembered, the sharp angles of his face a little more defined, but those piercing blue eyes, the same ones that haunted her memories, were locked on her with an intensity that sent her heart racing. She felt the twins stiffen beside her. Ethan and Emma had always been perceptive, and they immediately sensed something was wrong. The boy, Noah, simply looked up, his deep blue eyes studying Marcus in quiet curiosity. Kate. Marcus's voice was low, controlled, but edged with something raw. She swallowed, trying to compose herself. Marcus. A thick silence stretched between them. Then Ethan spoke, his voice cautious. Mom, who is he? Kate hesitated. Marcus took a step forward, his gaze flickering toward the children before locking onto Noah. And then, in a voice that carried 7 years of pain, regret, and longing, he said, I'm your father. Noah's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't speak. He just stared, as if processing the words. Emma's mouth fell open. Ethan's brows furrowed. Kate clenched her jaw. Marcus, not here. He exhaled sharply, nodding. Fine. Let's talk somewhere private. Kate hesitated. She had known this moment would come one day. She had spent years preparing for it. And yet now that it was here, she wasn't sure she was ready. She turned to her children. Finish your dinner. I'll be right back. Ethan, ever the protective older brother, frowned. Are you sure? She managed a small smile. I'm sure. After a moment, he nodded, but his eyes followed Marcus warily. As she rose from the table, she caught Noah still staring at Marcus, his expression unreadable. Kate took a deep breath and led Marcus toward the private lounge of the restaurant. The storm was here, and she had no idea how to stop it. Varied truths and unspoken regrets. The private lounge of Le Jardin was a secluded space meant for VIP guests who wanted to discuss business away from prying ears. Tonight, however, there were no deals to be made, no negotiations to be won, only ghosts from the past that refused to stay buried. Marcus stood near the window, his silhouette outlined against the shimmering cityscape. His hands were in his pockets, a posture that suggested control. But Kate knew him too well. The tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened, he was anything but composed. Kate, on the other hand, kept her expression carefully neutral. She had spent years preparing for this moment, for the inevitable day Marcus reappeared in their lives. But now that it was happening, she realized she wasn't as prepared as she thought. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. You were pregnant when you left. His voice was low, steady, but she could hear the storm raging beneath it. Kate exhaled slowly. Yes. And you didn't think I had a right to know. She met his gaze without flinching. I thought about telling you 1,000 times, but every time I reminded myself why I left in the first place. Marcus's eyes darkened. That doesn't justify keeping my son from me. Kate clenched her fists at her sides. Doesn't it? I wasn't trying to hurt you, Marcus. I was protecting Noah. From what? He snapped. From me. Kate sighed. You were never there, Marcus. Not really. Your work, your company, those were your priorities. I spent years waiting, hoping you would realize that your family needed you more than your next deal. But you never did. Marcus rubbed his temples, frustration evident in every line of his body. I was building something, Kate. I was securing our future. She let out a bitter laugh. Our future. Marcus, you were securing your empire. I was just collateral damage. He fell silent at that, his gaze burning into hers. You had a choice, Kate continued, her voice softer now. You could have made time. You could have shown up. But every time, you chose the boardroom over the dinner table. You chose deals over bedtime stories. And when I finally told you I was breaking, that I couldn't do it anymore, You told me to hold on just a little longer. Marcus swallowed hard. The memory stung. Kate shook her head. I left because I had to, Marcus, not because I wanted to. And by the time I found out I was pregnant with Noah, I realized something. If I told you, it wouldn't change anything. You would have promised to be there, but you wouldn't have been. And I couldn't let another child grow up waiting for a father who was always absent. A heavy silence settled between them. Marcus turned back toward the window, his hands tightening into fists. I wouldn't have abandoned him, he said, almost to himself. Kate studied him carefully. Maybe not intentionally, but it would have happened, just like it did with Ethan and Emma. I did what I thought was best for them. You took away my choice, Marcus said, his voice rough. I deserved to know. I deserved to be there. Kate sighed, rubbing her forehead. Would you have been? The question cut deeper than Marcus wanted to admit. For years, he had convinced himself that he had no choice, that the sacrifices he made were necessary. But standing here, in front of the woman he had loved, the woman he had lost, he found himself unable to answer. Kate took a step back, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to protect herself from the weight of their past. Look, I don't regret raising them on my own. They've had a good life, Marcus, a stable life. But I won't lie to you. Noah asks about his father. He doesn't say much. But I can tell. He feels different, like a piece of him is missing. Marcus clenched his jaw, his chest tightening. So let me be in his life, he said. Let me be in all of their lives. Kate's eyes searched his face, looking for any sign of hesitation. Being a father isn't something you just step into when it's convenient, Marcus. If you do this, you have to do it right. No half measures. Marcus nodded, his spine straightening with determination. I won't make the same mistake twice. She studied him for a long moment before finally exhaling. We're in town for the MIT robotics competition. The kids are competing. Marcus's brows lifted slightly. He knew Ethan and Emma were smart, but robotics, that was impressive. If you're serious about this, Kate continued, show up. Meet them on their turf in their world. It was a challenge, a test. Marcus had spent his entire life winning battles in boardrooms. But this was the most important battle of all. And he wasn't about to lose. The next day, MIT robotics competition. Marcus arrived at MIT earlier than planned. The massive halls were filled with students, professors, and young competitors, each working on their projects with focused intensity. The energy was electric, a world away from the sterile corporate offices he was used to. And then he saw them. Ethan stood at the center of a group, arms crossed, speaking with a confidence that reminded Marcus of himself. He was strategizing, explaining something in crisp, precise language. Emma, in contrast, was animated, gesturing excitedly as she adjusted the wiring on a robotic arm. Her sleeves were rolled up, grease smudged across her fingers, and she seemed utterly in her element. And then there was Noah, the quiet one, the observer. He wasn't with the others. Instead, he sat at a desk, laser-focused on a screen, typing lines of code with deliberate precision. He barely looked up when Ethan said something to him, just nodded, adjusted a variable, and continued working. Marcus swallowed hard. How many moments like this had he missed? A voice startled him. Didn't expect to see you here so early. Kate stood beside him, arms crossed, watching her children with a mix of pride and quiet amusement. Marcus forced a chuckle. I don't like being late. Kate's gaze softened just a little. Good, because they're watching. Sure enough, Ethan had noticed him. His expression was unreadable. Emma, however, grinned and waved. And Noah just stared. Marcus took a deep breath and stepped forward. The real work was just beginning. Bridges made of glass. Marcus Carter had spent his entire life negotiating impossible deals, winning unwinnable battles, and bending reality to his will. And yet, as he stood at the edge of the MIT robotics competition floor, watching his children work, he realized he was completely out of his depth. This wasn't his world. This wasn't a boardroom where he could control the narrative with a well-placed strategy or a sharp remark. This was their world. And he was just a spectator. For now. The observer. Ethan stood with his arms crossed, eyeing Marcus with the same level of skepticism he might reserve for an underperforming team member. He was the strategist, the planner. Marcus recognized the sharp analytical mind because it was just like his own. Emma, ever the vibrant spark, was more open. She had waved when she saw him earlier, and now she gave him a grin as she tightened a screw on the robotic arm they were working on. But Noah didn't look at him. He remained seated in front of his laptop, fingers flying over the keyboard, his gaze locked onto the screen. If the world around him collapsed, Noah would probably just adjust the code to compensate. He was an observer, a problem solver, someone who didn't react to the world so much as he calculated it. Marcus felt a sharp pang in his chest. He had missed so much. The thought of how many birthdays, how many scraped knees, how many school projects had gone by without him there. It was suffocating. And yet now that he was here, he had no idea where to start. He had built billion-dollar empires, but standing in front of these 3 kids, his own children, he felt powerless. An unspoken challenge. "You're really staying?" Emma asked, rolling up her sleeves as she adjusted a circuit board. Marcus nodded, meeting her gaze. "Yeah, I am." Ethan gave a skeptical hum but said nothing. Noah, nothing. Kate, standing off to the side, watched carefully. She had given him the opportunity to prove himself, but she wasn't going to make it easy for him. Marcus cleared his throat. "So, robotics, what exactly are you guys working on?" Emma perked up, excited to explain. "It's an autonomous navigation bot. It has to make it through an obstacle course without any direct commands once we send it in." Marcus nodded, intrigued. "Like real-world AI. Adaptation and problem-solving." "Exactly," Ethan said, narrowing his eyes slightly. "You know about that." "I own a few companies that develop similar technology." Marcus allowed a small smirk. "But nothing as impressive as this." Ethan huffed, unimpressed. "Of course." Emma giggled. "That's Ethan's way of saying he doesn't trust you yet." Marcus turned to Ethan. "That fair?" Ethan met his gaze, unwavering. "Yeah." Marcus nodded, respecting the honesty. "Then I guess I'll have to earn it." For the first time, Noah's fingers hesitated over the keyboard, just for a fraction of a second. But Marcus caught it. Progress. Small, but it was there. Breaking the ice. The competition floor was buzzing with energy. Teams made final adjustments to their robots, fine-tuning code, and calibrating hardware. Marcus stayed in the background, careful not to interfere but making his presence known. Emma was the first to crack. "Hey, Dad," she said, testing the word again, as if seeing how it fit in her mouth. "You any good at chess?" Marcus blinked at the sudden change in conversation. "I used to be." Emma's eyes sparkled. "Wanna play?" Ethan scoffed. "He's probably rusty." Marcus arched a brow. Only one way to find out. Emma pulled out a small travel chessboard and set up the pieces. As the game began, Marcus quickly realized Ethan was a prodigy. He played with foresight, planning 5 moves ahead, setting traps with precision. Marcus barely kept up, and for the first time in years, he felt his mind truly challenged. Noah, though silent, watched. Not the game itself, but how Marcus played, how he reacted, how he adjusted his strategy. And then, after 20 intense minutes, "Checkmate," Ethan said, his lips twitching upward just slightly. Marcus leaned back, exhaling. "Dan, you're good." "I know." Emma laughed. "He's been waiting for a challenge." Noah, for the first time, spoke. His voice was quiet, but deliberate. You think broken things can always be fixed. Marcus turned to him, meeting those piercing blue eyes, his eyes. No, Marcus said honestly, but the most important ones. They're worth trying. Noah didn't respond. But after a long moment, he gave a small nod. A crack in the armor. A start. The first test. The competition was about to begin, and the tension was thick in the air. Ethan strategized with the team. Emma made last-minute wiring checks. Noah sat at his laptop, fingers poised over the keyboard like a composer at a piano. Marcus stayed at the edge of the room, hands in his pockets, watching, learning. The robot whirred to life. The first challenge was a maze, one that constantly changed. Other teams had failed before reaching the halfway point. Their robot hesitated for a second, calculating. Then Noah's fingers danced across the keyboard. A correction. A new path. The robot adjusted and moved forward. The room held its breath. The next challenge. An AI puzzle that required simultaneous mechanical and programming inputs. Ethan controlled the mechanical side. Emma adjusted sensors. Noah anticipated the algorithm's countermeasures. And then, success. The final round. A race to the finish line against two rival teams. Kate gripped Marcus's arm as they watched. He barely noticed. Noah's eyes flicked between the screen and the moving robot, making micro-adjustments in real time. The buzzer rang. Cheers erupted. They had won. Marcus released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Emma practically tackled her teammates in excitement. Ethan gave a rare grin. And Noah? Noah turned toward Marcus. Not with excitement, not with a grin, but with something deeper. A look of acknowledgement. Maybe even acceptance. Dinner and decisions. That night, at the hotel restaurant, the team celebrated. Emma was in high spirits, recounting every detail of the competition. Ethan analyzed strategies with his teammates. Noah sat beside Marcus. Quiet, contemplative. Marcus turned to him. That was impressive. Noah hesitated. Then, thanks. The first real acknowledgement he had given Marcus all day. Emma, noticing the exchange, grinned. See, he's warming up to you. Noah rolled his eyes, but he didn't deny it. Marcus chuckled. I'll take that as progress. Kate, who had been listening quietly, set down her glass. You really mean to stay in their lives this time? Marcus met her gaze. Yeah, I do. She studied him for a long moment. Then prove it. Ethan, who had been silent, looked at Marcus. You'll have to earn it. Marcus didn't hesitate. I intend to. As they left the restaurant, Emma slipped her small hand into Marcus. I'm glad we found you, she said softly. Marcus swallowed past the lump in his throat. So am I. Kate watched the exchange, her guard lowering just a fraction. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something. And for Marcus Carter, that was enough to fight for. Shadows of the past, lights of the future. A new reality. Marcus Carter had never been the kind of man to second-guess himself. In business, in negotiations, in strategy, his decisions were swift, calculated, and final. But standing outside the hotel that night, with the cool Boston air wrapping around him, and the echo of Emma's words in his ears, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Doubt. I'm glad we found you. A simple sentence. A statement from a child who should have grown up knowing him, but instead had found him after years of absence. For a man who had spent his life making precise calculations, the weight of those words felt immeasurable. The children were inside, finishing dessert. Kate stood beside him, her arms wrapped around herself, her posture relaxed, but her eyes sharp. You look like a man who just realized he's in over his head, she mused. Marcus exhaled. Maybe I am. Kate turned to him fully, raising a brow. Are you backing out? His gaze snapped to hers. No. The word came out firm, leaving no room for doubt. She studied him for a long moment before nodding. Good, because they're watching, whether you realize it or not. That truth settled deep in his chest. Noah, the quiet one, watching for cracks in his resolve. Ethan, the skeptical one, waiting for him to fail. Emma, the hopeful one, daring to believe he might actually stay. They were all waiting to see what he would do next. And for the first time in his life, Marcus Carter wasn't worried about sealing a deal, finalizing a contract, or strategizing for an acquisition. He was worried about being enough. An invitation and an oath. The next morning, Marcus woke before sunrise, his mind still tangled in the events of the previous night. His assistant had left several messages, updating him on the urgent matters he had been ignoring. There were contracts to sign, investors to reassure, board members to appease. For years, his entire identity had revolved around that world. But today, he silenced his phone. The empire could wait. Instead, he texted Kate. "Marcus, I want to spend the day with them." Her response came quicker than expected. "Kate, meet us at the aquarium at 11. A beat later. "Kate, no bodyguards, no assistants, just you." Marcus smirked. She knew him too well. At the aquarium, Marcus arrived 10 minutes early. Boston's New England Aquarium was bustling with families, children running excitedly to see the giant ocean tank, the penguin exhibit, and the sea lions basking in the morning sun. It was foreign to him. He was used to exclusive meetings in luxury hotels, not chaotic crowds of families with sticky-fingered toddlers. Then he saw them. Kate stood near the entrance, her hair tied back in a casual ponytail. She looked relaxed, yet her eyes never stopped scanning for the kids. She was a mother through and through. Ethan was checking something on his phone, his expression bored but attentive. Emma was bouncing on her heels, already excited for what lay ahead. Noah was sitting on a bench, his backpack resting beside him. He wasn't watching the crowd. He was watching Marcus, measuring him, calculating. Marcus took a breath and walked toward them. Kate noticed him first. She nudged Emma, who turned with a grin. "You actually came," she said, sounding genuinely pleased. Marcus glanced at Ethan, who gave him a single nod. Acknowledgement, but still not approval. Noah said nothing. Not yet. Marcus turned to Kate. "So, what's the plan?" Kate gave him a knowing smirk. "Try to keep up." Moments that mattered. The aquarium was a world of wonder. Emma was enthralled by the jellyfish exhibit, pressing her face against the glass as the luminescent creatures floated like tiny ghosts. Ethan, as expected, was fascinated by the engineering behind the ocean tank's filtration system. He asked the guide technical questions that even the staff struggled to answer. And Noah gravitated toward the interactive robotics exhibit near the deep-sea exploration section. Marcus followed him, watching as he carefully examined a robotic arm used for underwater exploration. "You like this stuff?" Marcus asked, standing beside him. Noah nodded. "Yeah." His voice was soft but sure. "It's efficient." Marcus tilted his head. "Efficient?" Noah finally looked up at him. "Machines don't lie. They don't make promises they can't keep." The words landed like a punch to the gut. Marcus inhaled sharply. He wanted to respond, to explain, to say something that would make it right. But Noah had already turned back to the robotic arm. Watching, calculating, and waiting. The ice begins to crack. After hours of exploring, they all sat outside near the water, eating pretzels and drinking sodas. Kate had drifted off into a quiet conversation with Ethan. Emma was chattering away, recounting every tiny detail about the penguins. And Noah, for the first time all day, Noah spoke without prompting. "You know," he said, eyes still fixed on the ocean, "there was this experiment in school about quantum entanglement." Marcus raised a brow. "Really?" Noah nodded. "The idea that two particles can be connected, no matter how far apart they are. even if one is on Earth and the other is light years away. Marcus studied his son carefully. And what do you think about that? Noah shrugged, his voice quiet but carrying a weight far beyond his years. I think some things stay connected, even when they shouldn't be. Marcus's breath caught. Noah turned to him then, really looked at him. I don't know if I'd want to trust you, he admitted, but I think I might want to try. The words were small, but to Marcus, they were everything. He nodded, his throat tightening. That's all I can ask. Noah held his gaze for another moment, then returned to his pretzel as if the conversation had never happened. But Marcus knew. The ice was beginning to crack, and for the first time in years, hope flickered. Kate's warning. Later that evening, as the sky turned gold and the city lights flickered to life, Kate pulled Marcus aside. You did good today, she admitted. Marcus exhaled. But Kate sighed, crossing her arms. They're starting to open up to you, especially Noah. Marcus nodded. That's a good thing. Kate's eyes softened. It is, but it also means that if you let them down again, if you walk away, she swallowed hard, it'll break them. Marcus stared at her, the weight of her words settling deep into his bones. I'm not walking away, he said, his voice steel. Kate studied him, searching for cracks, for hesitation. She found none. After a long pause, she nodded. Then don't mess this up. With that, she turned, walking back toward the children. Marcus stayed behind for a moment, watching them. He had spent years building an empire. But now, for the first time in his life, he realized something. They were the only thing that had ever truly mattered. And he wasn't going to lose them again. Not now. Not ever. The breaking point. A silent drive and a loaded question. The ride back to the hotel was quiet. Kate sat in the front seat, her gaze fixed on the road. The kids were in the back, Ethan scrolling through his phone, Emma humming softly to herself, and Noah staring out the window, lost in thought. Marcus sat beside Kate, his mind still replaying the conversation from earlier. If you let them down again, it'll break them. Her words echoed in his head, tightening around his chest like a vice. He had spent years making the wrong choices, prioritizing wealth over the things that truly mattered. Now he had been given a second chance. But could he be the father they needed him to be? As the car rolled to a stop in front of the hotel, Emma broke the silence. Dad? Marcus turned, surprised. She had been testing the word all day, as if trying to see if it would stick. What's up, sweetheart? Emma smiled at the name, then hesitated before asking. Are you staying in Boston? The question made Ethan glance up from his phone, and even Noah's fingers, which had been idly tapping against his seat, froze for a moment. Kate's hands tightened around the steering wheel. Marcus inhaled. He knew what they were really asking. Are you leaving again? He caught himself before he could default to corporate language, to vague promises that could be interpreted in any way. He couldn't lie. Not to them. I have to go back to New York soon, he admitted, watching their faces carefully. Emma's smile dimmed slightly. Ethan's expression didn't change, and Noah simply looked away, as if he had expected it all along. But Marcus continued quickly. I don't want this to be temporary. I don't want to be someone who just drops in and disappears again. He leaned forward slightly, making sure they all heard him. I want to be a part of your lives. And if that means coming to Boston more often, finding a way to be here more, then I will. Silence. Then, Ethan scoffed lightly. Talk is cheap. Kate shot him a warning look, but Marcus held up a hand. No, he's right. He turned to Ethan, his gaze steady. I don't expect you to believe me. Not yet. But I'll prove it. Ethan studied him for a long moment before shrugging. We'll see. Emma, ever the optimist, nodded. Okay, but you better show up for my art show next month. No excuses. I'll be there. She beamed. And Noah said nothing. But he didn't get out of the car right away either. Marcus considered that a win. Late-night conversations. Later that night, Marcus stood by the hotel window, staring out at the city that had once been his whole world. Now it just felt like background noise. His phone buzzed on the table. A message from his assistant. Board meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. Investors need reassurance. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. He knew what was expected of him. He had spent years molding himself into the kind of man who never missed a meeting, never let emotions interfere with business. But tonight, he didn't care. Instead of replying, he grabbed his phone and typed out a new message. Marcus, reschedule. I'll be in Boston another day. He stared at the message for a long moment before hitting send. There, one step at a time. A knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. When he opened it, he wasn't surprised to see Kate standing there. She was dressed casually, a sweatshirt and leggings, her hair slightly messy from the long day. But her eyes were sharp. "You're still here," she said, almost as if testing the words. Marcus smirked. "Told you I wasn't leaving." She leaned against the doorframe. "The kids are still adjusting." Ethan's skeptical. Emma's hopeful. "Noah," she sighed. "Noah's guarded. He's different." Marcus frowned slightly. "How so?" Kate hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Noah sees the world differently. He's analytical, but also incredibly sensitive. He doesn't trust easily." She met Marcus's gaze. "And when he does trust someone, if they break it, he doesn't forget." Marcus absorbed her words. "I won't break his trust," he said, voice firm. Kate studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "We'll see." It was the same response Ethan had given him. Marcus understood. He had to earn this. The moment that changed everything. The next morning, Marcus woke early and went downstairs for breakfast. To his surprise, he wasn't the only one. Noah was sitting in a quiet corner of the hotel lounge, laptop open, coffee untouched beside him. For a moment, Marcus just watched him. Then, carefully, he approached. "Mind if I sit?" Noah barely glanced up. "It's a public space." Marcus smirked. "Fair enough." He sat down, watching as Noah continued typing at a speed that was frankly impressive. "What are you working on?" Noah hesitated for a second, then turned his laptop slightly. Marcus leaned in, reading the lines of code. It wasn't just programming. It was complex, far beyond anything most kids his age would be doing. Marcus whistled low. "This is next level." Noah shrugged. "It's just a side project." Marcus arched a brow. "Just a side project. You're building an adaptive algorithm for predictive modeling. That's something even my engineers struggle with." Noah finally looked up. "You understand it?" Marcus nodded. "I work with AI developers. This is impressive." Noah stared at him for a long moment, something unreadable in his gaze. Then, without warning, he turned his laptop fully toward Marcus. "I'm stuck on a sequence." Marcus blinked. This was new. A test, maybe. A chance to prove something. He leaned in. "Show me." For the next hour, they worked together. Marcus asked questions, pointed out patterns, made suggestions, but he never took over. And Noah, for the first time, actually spoke to him freely. Not forced small talk. Not cautious responses. Real conversation. By the time they were done, Noah sat back, studying the screen. "You're not bad," he admitted. Marcus smirked. "I'll take that as high praise." Noah hesitated. Then, so quietly Marcus almost missed it, he said, "Maybe you should stay longer." Marcus's breath caught. He had spent the last few days trying to break through to his son. And now, finally, Noah was giving him an opening. A chance. A fragile, precious chance. Marcus nodded, his voice steady, but filled with quiet emotion. I think I will. And just like that, for the first time in 7 years, Marcus Carter felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. A father's reckoning. A door opened, but not yet walked through. Marcus Carter had spent years perfecting the art of persuasion. He could walk into a boardroom, analyze every face, every hesitation, every unsaid word, and manipulate the flow of conversation like a master conductor leading an orchestra. Yet, sitting across from Noah in the quiet hotel lounge, he knew that this was the most important negotiation of his life, one he could not afford to lose. Maybe you should stay longer. The words had been spoken hesitantly, as if Noah himself was unsure whether he meant them. But they were an opening, a chance, and Marcus wasn't going to waste it. I think I will, he had said. Noah had given a small nod, then closed his laptop and walked off without another word. Marcus let him go. He had learned something critical in these past few days. Noah didn't respond well to pressure. He didn't like being forced into conversations or pushed into emotions he wasn't ready to feel. Noah needed time. Marcus was willing to wait. But that didn't mean the rest of the world would. The consequences of choices. The moment Marcus returned to his hotel room, his phone lit up like a Christmas tree. Board of Directors meeting. Urgent. Investor concerns, stock fluctuations, PR team requesting a statement on your absence. He exhaled. He had expected this. Marcus had built his empire with an iron grip, making himself an indispensable force in the company's decision-making. The idea of him being unavailable was almost unfathomable to his team. But for the first time, he didn't care. He paced the room, weighing his next move. Then, with a deep breath, he called his assistant. "David," he said as soon as the line connected. "Sir, thank God. You missed the morning call. Investors are getting anxious. The media's asking why you've been off-grid. Reschedule the meeting." A long pause. "Sir, you heard me. Reschedule. I'll be in Boston for another week." Another pause, but this time it was shock rather than confusion. "Understood," David finally said, though his voice made it clear he did not understand at all. Marcus didn't care. He had spent 7 years chasing deals. Now he was chasing something far more valuable. The invitation. Later that afternoon, Marcus found himself in an unfamiliar situation, not knowing what to do. He had cleared his schedule. He had made the decision to stay. But now what? He couldn't just hover around waiting for his kids to come to him. That wasn't how this worked. Kate had said it herself. If he wanted a relationship with them, he had to do it right. No half measures. And so, for the first time in his life, Marcus Carter did something uncomfortable. He asked for help. He knocked on Kate's hotel door. When she opened it, her eyes immediately narrowed. "What's wrong?" Marcus smirked. "Why do you assume something's wrong?" "Because you never show up unannounced unless it's for business. And since I don't own $1 billion company, that means something's wrong." He huffed a quiet laugh. "Fine. You got me." Kate crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "All right. Let's hear it." "I want to spend more time with them," Marcus said simply. Kate blinked. He continued, "I don't just want to be the guy who shows up when it's convenient, but I also don't want to force myself into their lives in a way that makes them uncomfortable." Kate watched him carefully. "That's surprisingly self-aware of you." He rolled his eyes. "Yes, Kate. I am capable of introspection." A small smile played on her lips before she sighed. "All right. If you're serious, there's something you can do." Marcus straightened. "Name it." Kate hesitated for just a second before saying, "Come to dinner at the house." His breath caught. Not a restaurant. Not neutral ground. Her house. Their home. She was inviting him into their world. Marcus understood immediately what this meant. This wasn't just about showing up. It was about proving something. "Tomorrow night," she added. "I'll cook, but you better bring something decent to drink." Marcus smirked. "You got it." But beneath his confidence, He felt it. A deep, quiet nervousness. Because this was real. This was a test. And he couldn't afford to fail. The dinner that was more than a meal. The next evening, Marcus stood outside Kate's house, a bottle of French Bordeaux in his hand, and a sudden, ridiculous feeling of panic settling in his chest. This was absurd. He had closed billion-dollar deals, negotiated international mergers, and built an empire from nothing. And yet, standing outside this two-story house with its warm lights and neatly trimmed hedges, he felt like a college kid meeting his girlfriend's parents for the first time. Ridiculous. He rang the doorbell. Kate answered a moment later, dressed in jeans and a fitted sweater, her hair pulled back. She took one look at him and raised a brow. "You look nervous." He scowled. "I am not nervous." She smirked. "Aha." Keep telling yourself that. Before he could respond, a voice from inside called out, "Is that him?" Emma. Seconds later, she appeared behind Kate, beaming. "Dad, you came." She grabbed his hand and pulled him inside without hesitation. The house was warm, cozy, a stark contrast to his penthouse, which felt more like a showroom than a home. Photos lined the walls. Pictures of the kids. Pictures of Kate with them. But none of him. His absence was etched into the very walls. Marcus swallowed hard. Emma tugged him into the kitchen, where Ethan stood by the counter, casually scrolling through his phone. He looked up, saw Marcus, and gave him a single nod. That was progress. Noah sat at the kitchen table, a book open in front of him. He didn't look up immediately, but Marcus saw the way his fingers tightened slightly on the pages. A reaction. That was something. Kate shut the door behind him, her expression unreadable. "All right," she said, walking toward the stove. "Dinner's almost ready. She pointed at Marcus. "Pour the wine." He chuckled. "Bossy." "I have to be," she shot back. "I raised 3 kids on my own." The unspoken words "because you weren't here" hung in the air. Marcus let it sit. He had no defense. Instead, he nodded and went to pour the wine. One small step at a time. An unexpected moment. After dinner, Emma challenged Marcus to a game of cards. Ethan observed, offering occasional commentary, and Noah sat close. Still quiet. Still reserved. But he stayed. And at one point, when Marcus reached for his glass, his hand brushed against Noah's. The boy didn't flinch. Didn't pull away. And for Marcus Carter, that small moment, that single moment of unbroken contact, meant more than all the wealth in the world. He was finally making progress, but the hardest part was still to come. Because winning a battle was easy. Winning their trust, that was going to take everything he had. And Marcus Carter, for the first time in his life, was ready to fight for it. A future worth fighting for. A house that was never a home. Marcus Carter had always been a man who understood the value of things. Land, investments, mergers. He knew how to calculate risk, how to leverage resources, how to play the long game. But as he sat in Kate's living room, watching Emma shuffle cards, Ethan analyzed the rules, and Noah sit quietly with his book, he realized something unsettling. He had no idea how to calculate this. A home. A family. Something that wasn't just measured in numbers, but in moments. Kate leaned against the doorway, watching him. She had been doing that all night, studying him, as if waiting for him to crack, to retreat back to his empire where everything was predictable. But Marcus had made up his mind. He wasn't going anywhere. Not this time. And not ever again. A silent invitation. After dinner, Ethan had retreated to his room. Emma had pulled out an old board game, and Noah had disappeared. Not out of the house, but into himself. Marcus noticed how the boy had gotten quieter as the night went on, how he had barely spoken at dinner, barely engaged with his siblings. Kate had noticed too. "He does that sometimes," she murmured, sitting down beside Marcus on the couch, a glass of wine in her hand. He needs space when he's thinking. Marcus frowned. Thinking about what? Kate hesitated, swirling the wine in her glass. You. The word hit harder than he expected. Me? Kate exhaled. Marcus, you don't understand how much he thinks before he acts. He's not like Ethan or Emma. Ethan challenges, Emma trusts. But Noah. She shook her head. Noah waits, he watches, and when he decides on something, that's it. Marcus took a slow breath. And what is he deciding now? Kate gave him a look. Whether he can trust you. The weight of that statement settled deep in his chest. He had spent years closing billion-dollar deals, convincing men in boardrooms to bet their fortunes on his ideas. And yet this one boy, his own son, was the hardest deal he had ever faced. But it was also the only one that mattered. A late-night encounter. That night, as the house settled into silence, Marcus found himself restless. He had been given a place here, if only for a night, but he felt like a stranger in his own family. Unable to sleep, he walked toward the kitchen to get some water. That's when he saw it, a dim light from under Noah's bedroom door. He hesitated. Then, with quiet steps, he approached. He knocked softly. Noah. There was a pause. Then, the door opened just an inch. Noah stood there, barefoot, wearing a loose t-shirt and sweatpants. His laptop was still open on his desk, the glow of the screen casting shadows over his face. Marcus had no idea what to say. So he said the only thing that felt honest. I couldn't sleep. Noah studied him for a moment, then, without a word, opened the door wider. An invitation. Marcus stepped inside, careful not to push too far. Noah's room was neat, precise, just like the boy himself. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with programming manuals and scientific journals. His desk was covered in schematics, loose wires, and a half-built robotic project. Marcus smiled slightly. You're a genius, you know that. Noah scoffed. Not really. Marcus walked over to the desk, studying the half-built robot. This is your project for MIT. Noah shook his head. No, this is mine. Marcus looked at him. Your personal project. A small nod. Marcus ran a finger over the metal casing. What's it do? Noah hesitated. It's supposed to be an AI assistant, but different from normal ones. Marcus tilted his head. How? Noah's voice was quieter now. Most AI is built to predict behavior, to anticipate needs based on data. He sat down, running a hand over the unfinished wiring. But people aren't predictable. They're messy. They say things they don't mean. They make promises they don't keep. Marcus felt something in his chest tighten. Noah turned to him, his blue eyes sharp. So I'm trying to build something that understands. Why? Silence filled the room. Noah hadn't just been building a robot. He had been building a way to understand the world. To understand why people leave. Why they break promises. Why fathers walk away. Marcus sat down across from him. Noah, he said softly, I don't have an answer to that. I wish I did. Noah didn't respond. Marcus exhaled. But I can tell you this. I regret every second I wasn't here. His voice was raw, unguarded. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making up for it. Noah's fingers tightened slightly on the desk. Another pause. Then, so soft that Marcus almost missed it. Okay. Marcus's breath caught. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But a crack in the wall. A step forward. And for Marcus, that was enough. A new path forward. The next morning, as Marcus packed his bag, he heard a knock at his hotel door. When he opened it, he was met with 3 pairs of eyes. Emma, bright-eyed and hopeful. Ethan, guarded but not closed off. And Noah, standing slightly behind them, hands in his pockets. Emma was the first to speak. You're not leaving yet, are you? Marcus knelt down slightly, meeting her gaze. "Not if you don't want me to." Emma grinned and immediately hugged him. Ethan, arms crossed, muttered, still not convinced. Marcus smirked. "Good. I like a challenge." Ethan rolled his eyes, but his lips twitched slightly, just enough to let Marcus know he was winning ground. Then Noah stepped forward. He didn't say anything at first. Then, finally, "Are you coming to Emma's art show next month?" Marcus's chest tightened. A test, a single opportunity to prove himself. He met Noah's gaze, steady and unwavering. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." And for the first time, Noah smiled. It was small, barely there, but it was real. And Marcus Carter knew. He had won something far more valuable than any deal he had ever closed. A chance, a future, a family. And he would never let them go again.